created a misunderstanding. To indigenous peoples, medicine often referred to spiritual power, healing ceremonies, and a harmonious connection to the natural world. Oral traditions, prehistory, refers to the era before our common knowledge of written records. Evidence of prehistoric earth mounds in North America were built by a Semitic-speaking lineage of an ancient Negus. Ancient Semitic civilization emerged out of a prehistoric mound builders civilization of North America, were complex Indo-Semitic priest-king chiefdoms, American societies, and islands. Semitic peoples in Spanish colonialism are labeled African or Muslim Berber. The Spanish applied both terms as foreign labels to different groups they encountered, creating an us versus them dynamic. The Spanish had ongoing conflicts with the Muslim Moros while the Negritos were often pushed to the fringes of society. Historical and cultural differences. Negritos and Moros have distinct and separate histories, languages, and cultures. Genetic origin. Negritos belong to some of the earliest human populations in Southeast Asia, with unique genetic markers. The Moros are Austronesian peoples whose ancestors adopted Islam through trade with Arab and Malay merchants, beginning in the 14th century. Manila galleons were Spanish trading ships that operated between the Philippines and Mexico from 1565 to 1815, transporting a significant number of enslaved and free Asian people, not just Chinese, who were all broadly categorized as Chinos in colonial Mexico. Many of these individuals were from the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, and the Spanish Philippines, having been enslaved by Portuguese or Spanish traders in Asian slave markets before being shipped to Mexico to work. The term Chino was a legal and social designation for anyone perceived as being from Asia, regardless of their actual origin, and was instrumental in their enslavement. The Trans-Pacific slave trade route, from Manila to Mexico, enslaved individuals, including those from the Indian subcontinent and the Philippines, were sold in the Manila slave market and then transported across the Pacific to the Mexican port of Acapulco. The role of the galleons, these China ships or Manila galleons, carried both goods and people. While some were personal slaves of officials and wealthy merchants, many others were brought as part of a large-scale, if often illicit, trans-Pacific slave trade to address labor shortages in colonial Mexico. Who were the Chinos? Broad categorization, Chino was a catch-all term used in colonial Mexico for any person of Asian descent, regardless of whether they were actually Chinese, a common misconception. Diverse origins. This group included South Asians from places like the Bay of Bengal and Portuguese India, as well as enslaved Southeast Asians and Filipinos. From enslavement to freedom. Of forced labor, these individuals were largely destined for domestic service, often in wealthy households. A legal status starting in the late 16th century. The Spanish crown began to view these individuals as indigenous vassals of the crown. By the mid-17th century, they could no longer be held as slaves. Embracing Indian identity, many Chinos embraced the legal category of Indians, the Spanish term for indigenous people of the Americas, to demand their freedom in legal courts. Religion. The defining characteristic of the Moro people is their practice of Islam. Negrito groups typically follow indigenous spiritual beliefs, though some have converted to Christianity or other religions. A cultural identity. Moros have a history of establishing independent sultanates and fiercely resisting Spanish and American colonial rule. The various Negrito groups are decentralized and have distinct cultural traditions tied to their specific territories. Spanish colonialism in the East Indies and Pacific Ocean. The Spanish applied both terms as foreign labels to different groups. The Spanish had ongoing conflicts with the Muslim Moros in the south, while the Negritos were often pushed to the fringes of society. Shared geography. Both groups were indigenous to the Philippines, which led to generalizations and misunderstandings by foreign observers. Lack of distinction by colonists to the Spanish, who categorized people by their religion and perceived racial characteristics. The different indigenous groups may have been poorly distinguished. The phrase, Little Moros, has no basis in colonial records and likely stems from a modern misunderstanding of this colonial context. Historical and cultural differences. Negritos and Moros have distinct and separate histories, languages, and cultures. Genetic origin. Negritos belong to some of the earliest human populations in Southeast Asia, with unique genetic markers. The Moros are Austronesian peoples whose ancestors adopted Islam through trade with Arab and Malay merchants beginning in the 14th century. Religion. The defining characteristic of the Moro people is their practice of Islam. Negrito groups typically follow indigenous spiritual beliefs, though some have converted to Christianity or other religions. A cultural identity. Moros have a history of establishing independent sultanates and fiercely resisting Spanish and American colonial rule. The various Negrito groups are decentralized and have distinct cultural traditions tied to their specific territories. Orphy Prosper. Fifth great-grandfather. B. ABT 1801, Opelousas St. Landry, Louisiana, USA. D. 28N of 1858, United States. Orphée Prosper as a historical figure born around 1801. However, the exact place of birth is contested, with some sources claiming Opelousas, St. Landry, Louisiana, and others citing Conakry, Guinea. In 1826, living in Mauritius would have been influenced by the island's diverse population, including French, British, African, Indian, and Chinese communities. The economy was centered around sugar plantations, with enslaved Africans and indentured laborers from India working the fields. The island's cultural landscape would have been a rich tapestry of traditions and languages. The abolition of slavery in 1835 would later shape the social dynamics on the island. Historical records document that from 1492 through the early 1600s, an estimated 500,000 Jews and Muslims were exiled from Spain and Portugal due to the Spanish Inquisition. However, in the golden age of the Moor, Brunson and Rashidi record that over 1 million Moors settled in France alone. It is known for fact that the family known as the Saulniers were amongst these 1 million or less to settle in France. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim exiles escaped to their ancestral homelands, like Orphée Prosper, grandson of Louis Saulnier, in Canada in 1685. Louis was also on the 1693 census taken at Beaubassin. He and his wife, Louise Bastineau, also known as Pelletier, had 13 children. Louis died on the 10th of March in 1709. The family eventually spread all throughout the United States in areas such as Louisiana, Massachusetts, South Carolina, and California. Pierre Saulnier, of the third generation, was deported to Liverpool, England, but later settled in Cayenne, French Guiana. Louis Saulnier, eighth great-grandfather. B. 1663. Vitré-Ille-Vilaine, Bretagne, France. D. 10 Mars 1710. Port Royal, Annapolis, Nova Scotia, Canada. The farthest west, mainly Morocco, Mauritania, Tunisia, and Algeria. The Saulniers in particular were amongst the Muslim Berbers, Moriscos, who made their way to France, where most Moriscos became Huguenots. However, some of them converted to Catholicism to avoid execution, as the Huguenots were also a persecuted people despised by the Catholic Church under Louis XVI. Such converts were also called converses. The Huguenots had occupied the southern eastern provinces of France, generally an area known as Languedoc. Still, in my early research, it is unknown to me, or any relative I have come across, what was the original surname of the Saulnier family. What must be taken into consideration is that it was not common for Muslims or any Arab to take a surname, as opposed to the common practice of taking surnames seen on a large scale in the West. Negrito. The term Negrito refers to several distinct indigenous ethnic groups who were among the earliest inhabitants of the Philippines prior to the arrival of Austronesian-speaking groups thousands of years ago. They are a minority within the total Philippine population today. Who are the Negrito people? The term Negrito is a Spanish word for little black person, coined by Spanish colonists in the 16th century. It is important to note that many modern scholars consider this term to be outdated and inappropriate, preferring to use the specific names of the ethnic groups. Negrito groups live in isolated, mountainous, or rural parts of Southeast Asia, with populations in the Philippines, Malaysia, and the Andaman Islands. In the Philippines, specific Negrito groups include the Ayeta of Luzon, the Ati of Panay, the Batak of Palawan, and the Mamanwa of Mindanao. These groups are known for their dark skin and small stature, but genetics show they are more closely related to East Asians than to African populations. Their appearance is the result of parallel evolutionary adaptations to tropical rainforest environments, not a recent migration from Africa. Traditionally, Negrito communities were nomadic hunter-gatherers, a lifestyle that has faced pressure from deforestation and land encroachment by outside groups. The modern Filipino population. The vast majority of the Philippine population today consists of Austronesian peoples. Arrival of Austronesians. These groups arrived in the archipelago through multiple waves of migration from Taiwan over the last several thousand years, following the earlier arrival of the Negrito groups. Assimilation and displacement. As the Austronesian populations expanded, they gradually displaced, assimilated, or intermixed with the indigenous Negrito peoples. Modern Filipino identity. The term Filipino today refers to the nationality of all citizens of the Philippines, encompassing a diverse population with mixed Austronesian, Chinese, Spanish, American, and other ancestries. The Negrito ethnic groups are an important, but numerically small, component of this national identity. In Negrito, this is a Spanish term meaning little black person. It was used by Spanish colonists to describe several indigenous ethnic groups in the Philippines and other parts of Southeast Asia who have dark skin and small stature. These groups, including the Ayeta, Ati, and Batak, are considered the archipelago's earliest inhabitants, arriving thousands of years before the Spanish. Moro, this is a Spanish term for Moor, which was the Spanish word for the Muslim inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula. When the Spanish arrived in the Philippines in the 16th century, they applied the term Moro to the Muslim Filipino communities they encountered, particularly in the southern islands of Mindanao, Sulu, and Palawan. The term was originally used in a derogatory sense due to the long history of conflict between Spanish Catholics and North African Muslims, but it has since been reclaimed by many Filipino Muslims as a term of identity and pride. Issues faced by Negrito communities. Today, Negrito communities continue to face significant challenges: discrimination and poverty. Many experience discrimination and are marginalized in society. Land rights, they struggle to protect their ancestral lands from deforestation and exploitation. Cultural erosion, younger generations are at risk of losing their traditions as they become more integrated into a globalized dominant culture. Racial interpretation. Semitic origins, yes, the Carthaginians were a Semitic people, descendants of Phoenician colonists from what is now modern-day Lebanon. The name Punic comes from the Latin word for Phoenician. Diverse population. While their elite, nobility, had Levantine Semitic ancestry, the general population and the army were a mix of Mediterranean and North African Semitic peoples. Carthaginian society and its armies included native North African Berbers, Numidians, Iberians, Gauls, and Greeks. Racial ambiguity. It is difficult to retroactively apply modern racial labels like black to the Carthaginians. It is crucial to understand that while the name Niger meant black, its usage in the Roman Empire was not necessarily tied to a modern concept of race. It was a descriptive name given for a physical trait, such as hair or skin tone, or an inherited cognomen. People named Niger were not a single ethnic group, but represented the diversity of the empire, from Italy to Syria and North Africa. Punic Wars were black people is inaccurate and based on modern racial definitions not applicable to the ancient world. The conflict was primarily between the city-states of Carthage, located in North Africa, and the Roman Republic, located in Italy. Both of these powers and their populations were ethnically diverse, reflecting the multicultural reality of the ancient Mediterranean. The Carthaginian Empire example was of Phoenician descent, though it is possible his family had intermixed with native North African populations. The Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio was given the honorary title Africanus after his decisive victory over Hannibal in North Africa, which ended the Second Punic War. The name was a victory title, or agnomen, celebrating his military success in that specific region, not an indication of his ethnic origin, why he was given the name. A decisive victory. His greatest achievement was his victory against Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. Significance of the location. The battle took place near Carthage, in what is now Tunisia, part of North Africa. By defeating the Carthaginians on their home turf, Scipio cemented Rome's dominance in the Western Mediterranean. A Roman naming tradition. In Roman society, it was a common practice to grant an honorary surname to a general to commemorate a major military conquest. For example, after Scipio's brother Lucius defeated King Antiochus III in Asia, he received the agnomen Asiaticus. The meaning of Africanus. The title literally means the African, but was understood by the Romans to mean conqueror of Africa. Clarifying misconceptions. Continent's name. The name of the African continent did not originate with Scipio Africanus. The Romans referred to the land south of the Mediterranean as Africa Terra, land of the Afri, named for a Berber tribe called the Afri, who inhabited the area. Scipio received his honorary title from the place, not the other way around. Racial identity. The name does not indicate that Scipio was from Africa or that he was black. He was born into one of the most prominent Roman patrician families, the Cornelii in Rome. Roman racial definitions were not based on modern concepts of skin color, and a title like Africanus referred to a place of military victory, not ethnicity. The Roman Republic. Diverse city-state. Early Rome was a city-state founded by Italic peoples who shared the Italian peninsula with other groups like Etruscans and Greeks. Cosmopolitan empire. As the Roman Republic expanded, its population became more diverse, including peoples from across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Race was not a defining social category in the way it is today. Status was determined by citizenship, class, and family, not skin color. Pescennius Niger. The most famous Roman figure to bear this name was Gaius Pescennius Niger, who was a Roman emperor from 193 to 194 AD, during a period of civil war. He was an experienced army officer and governor of Syria when he was proclaimed emperor by his legions after the murder of Pertinax. His rival, Septimius Severus, quickly marched east and defeated him in battle. Pescennius Niger was killed while attempting to flee to Parthia. His name, Niger, meant black or dark in Latin, which may have contrasted with his rival Clodius Albinus, whose name meant white, Simeon called Niger. Another reference to the name appears in the Bible's New Testament. Acts 13 mentions Simeon, who was called Niger among the prophets and teachers in the church at Antioch. Roman generals were given similar honorary titles, known as agnomina, to commemorate their significant victories. These were essentially victory nicknames added to their full name. The practice was particularly common during the Roman Republic, but continued into the empire. Examples of Roman generals with honorary titles. Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, as the younger brother of Scipio Africanus, he received the title Asiaticus after his command led to a decisive victory over the Seleucid king Antiochus III at the Battle of Magnesia in Asia Minor in 190 BCE. Quintus Caecilius Metellus Numidicus, this Roman statesman and general, earned his title Numidicus of Numidia for his successful campaigns during the Jugothine War in North Africa. Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus, after his conclusive victory against King Perseus of Macedon at the Battle of Pydnae in 168 BCE, the Senate awarded him the title Macedonicus. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, after a series of military successes, particularly in Sicily and Africa while serving under Sulla, his troops acclaimed him Magnus, meaning the Great. Decimus Junius Brutus Callaicus, this general earned the title Callaicus after defeating the Galaici people of northwestern Spain in 138 BCE. How the system changed under the empire. While the tradition of awarding agnomina continued, the system evolved after the Roman Republic became an empire. Emperors began to collect these victory titles as a sign of their supreme military authority and incorporated them into their official titles, even if they had not commanded the armies personally. Imperial victory titles. Emperors like Trajan and Hadrian accumulated numerous victory titles, such as Dassicus, victor over the Dacians, Parthicus, victor over the Parthians, and Germanicus, victor over the Germans, which became standard parts of the imperial titulature. Shared and inherited titles. Some titles became hereditary. For example, the name Germanicus, originally an honorary title awarded to Nero Claudius Drusus, became a part of the names of his sons and their descendants, including the famous general Germanicus. Roman contact with Africa. The Roman Empire's relationship with the African continent was complex and extended far beyond the use of the Latin word for black. North Africa. The Romans had extensive and centuries-long control over North Africa, a region that was crucial for the empire's food supply. Roman North Africa was integrated into the imperial economy and administration. Limited sub-Saharan exploration. While Roman knowledge of sub-Saharan Africa was limited, there were some exploratory expeditions. Accounts mention Roman journeys into West Africa, possibly reaching the Niger River basin and the Senegal River. However, the Romans did not have direct, continuous contact with the peoples of this deep interior. The origin of the river name. It is important to note that the name of the Niger River is not derived from the Latin word Niger. The river's name is believed to originate from local languages, with one prominent theory pointing to the Tuareg phrase Gern and Yeren, meaning river among rivers. European explorers later mistook this name or associated it with the Latin word, summary. In the context of the Roman Empire, the word Niger is a Latin adjective for black. It was used as a personal name or cognomen for various individuals, the short-lived Emperor Pescennius Niger. Simeon called Niger was a figure in early Christianity. The Romans had significant engagement with North Africa but only limited contact with sub-Saharan Africa. The name of the Niger River is not of Latin origin. The prehistoric mound, 800 to 1600 CE, are best understood by scholars today as chiefdoms, rather than empires. This political structure was hierarchical and based on hereditary leadership, with power. Key characteristics of mound fiefdoms were organized around a central town featuring one or more large earthen mounds and a plaza. This main town was typically the residence of the elite and religious leaders. Surrounding the capital were smaller towns, villages, and individual farmsteads that paid tribute to the central authority. Hereditary leadership, the chief and their relatives were a social elite, who inherited their positions, giving them control over resources, trade, and ceremonies. For example, the Natchez of Louisiana, a society known through early European accounts, had a chief and nobility who were believed to be descended from the sun. Labor mobilization. The large-scale construction of mounds and palisades, protective wooden walls, demonstrates the chief's ability to command a large labor force of commoners. This indicates a complex and highly organized society. At paramount chiefdoms, some of the larger mound centers, such as Cahokia, near modern St. Louis, or Etowah in Georgia, were so influential that they dominated a network of smaller subsidiary chiefdoms. This larger political organization is often called a paramount chiefdom. A cultural influence. These major centers spread their cultural influence through trade and shared religious practices, leading to a network of interactions across a wide geographic area. Items like copper, shells, and pottery, connection of the trans-Pacific slave trade. For over 250 years, from 1565 to 1815, the Manila galleons facilitated the exchange of goods between Asia and the Americas, but they also transported enslaved people. Diverse origins. Though many enslaved people came from the Philippines, they were also sourced from other parts of Asia, including India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, Japan, and China. The Spanish often grouped these diverse populations together under the single racialized term Chino. Acapulco, as a port of entry. The primary point of entry for these enslaved Asians was the port of Acapulco in Mexico. From there, They were sent to work in various capacities across New Spain, including in Mexico City. Purpose of enslavement. The practice was driven by the Spanish need for labor, especially after the catastrophic decline of the indigenous population in Mexico due to disease and brutal exploitation. The claim that the words are related is based on a linguistic fallacy. Negus is from a Semitic language, Jez-Amharic, while Niger is from a Latin Italic language family. These are two completely different linguistic roots. Origin of racial terms, the term Negro, the root of modern-day slurs, originates from the Spanish and Portuguese word for black, which itself comes from the Latin Niger. The racialized use of this term was solidified during the Atlantic slave trade. It has no connection to the Ethiopian royal title, Negus. Polynesian origins of Hawaiian chiefdoms. A settlement. The Hawaiian Islands were first settled by Polynesian voyagers, likely from the Marquesas or Society Islands, between 900 and 1200 CE. They used sophisticated navigation techniques to travel thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. A cultural and social development, once established, these early settlers developed a unique Hawaiian culture over several centuries in isolation from the rest of the world. Chiefdoms. Hawaiian society was organized into a complex caste-based system with a ruling class of chiefs, known as alii, who controlled land and resources. Rival chiefdoms engaged in warfare and politics, with alliances and conflicts shifting over time. Unification. The system of independent chiefdoms continued until the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when King Kamehameha I, a chief from the island of Hawaii, successfully united all the islands through warfare and diplomacy to establish the Kingdom of Hawaii. The decline of chiefdoms. Evidence of the last of the ancient Negus chiefdoms' navigational empire was Hawaii and treaties with the United States. The Kingdom of Hawaii signed several treaties with the United States over the decades. A Treaty of Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation, 1826.